Have you ever wondered why your chronic autoimmune disorders and chronic pain happened maybe just about the time that you were in your relationship with a narcissist? In today's episode, I want to share with you why your chronic pain and autoimmune disorder could potentially be linked to the trauma of narcissistic abuse. My name is Caroline Strawson, and I'm a positive psychology trauma coach and somatic therapist, helping you move from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth after the trauma, because let's face it, it is, of narcissistic abuse. So I get asked many questions in my community about the pain people are feeling when they are with the narcissist. And when I say pain, I'm not talking about emotional pain here. I'm talking about physical pain. Pain where it's literally painful getting out of bed in the morning. Pain in those joints. Even to the extent of getting diagnoses of things like fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, or even any of the other autoimmune disorders. So why is that? Why is it that there could be a potential link with chronic pain, autoimmune disorders, and narcissistic abuse? So to really be able to understand this, we really have to understand our nervous system and the biology of us. You know, when we were at school, we get taught, don't we, about our reproductive system. But what we don't get taught about is our nervous system. And a lot of the work that I do is really about nervous system healing. Now, if you are a new viewer of my YouTube channel, then now is the time to hit that subscribe button and that bell so you never miss any of my episodes, which will drop every single Friday to help you heal that trauma and educate you, lift that shame, stop that criticism of yourself so that you can start to piece together all of this. Because let me tell you, I know what it's like because I've been exactly where you are right now, and I'd hate for you to feel like you are on your own in all of this. That's why I have a free support group, for instance, on Facebook, Narcissistic Abuse and Trauma Recovery for Women, and you can find the link to this in the notes underneath this video so that you can come and join. But remember, hit that subscribe button, make sure you never miss an episode. So why is it then that we potentially have this pain around the time of being with a narcissist? Well, this goes down to our nervous system, and you may well have heard of those trauma responses: fight, flight, and freeze. Now, fight, flight, and freeze come about in our nervous system, all due to our perception of threat and danger. And I say that word perception because very often we're not in actual danger, like if we were being, say, attacked down the street. This is emotional pain from the narcissist. And what happens is our perception of the narcissist equates to danger for us, and we shift into those fight, flight, and freeze responses. Now, from a biology perspective, we need that. We need to be able to go into fight, flight, and freeze, because if we were in actual life-threatening danger, we would need to go in those trauma responses to stay alive. But what happens is we go into those trauma responses as human beings because we have what's called a neocortex, and we start to interpret other people's behaviors and events in a way that takes us back to our childhood and what we call those inner child wounds of maybe not feeling good enough, unlovable, not worthy. Maybe you don't feel important. And that almost becomes your version of somebody chasing you down the street trying to attack you. So what happens is, in that perception of the moment when the narcissist behaves in a certain behavior, we then go into these trauma responses. And what happens is we start to produce a hormone called cortisol. I'm sure many of you have heard of cortisol. And cortisol is something that mobilizes energy initially in our body, literally goes to our limbs, so that if we needed to fight or run away, that is what the cortisol is there for. You know, many times you've probably felt, maybe when you're about to see the narcissist, or maybe it's a child handover, you start to feel more edgy. You start to feel more mobilized energy in your body. And that's actually you producing more cortisol in anticipation of danger, but it's not actually life-threateningly dangerous. It's about triggering those core inner child wounds. So what happens is we produce that cortisol to try and protect us, to keep us in a fight or flight response. And let's say then when the narcissist goes, what often happens with narcissistic abuse is we stay stuck in those trauma responses. So rather than then calming our nervous system, what happens is we stay stuck in either fight, in flight, or freeze. Even though there is no actual danger now, we remain stuck because we are still perceiving the narcissist behavior, or maybe those around you not believing you in what you are trying to tell them. And you will interpret that as a reflection of you. That becomes your version of danger, like maybe the antelope out in the wild or someone trying to attack you. So you carry on producing cortisol. Now, what happens in our body when we produce cortisol, when we don't need it, this can start to lead to inflammation. And that inflammation then can start to come in our joints. It can start to come all over our body. And of course, when we have an inflamed body and that inflammation is pressing on our nerve endings, guess what happens? Pain! We start to be in pain. Now, one of the diagnoses that I see so much in my community is fibromyalgia. So many people in my free group have been diagnosed with the condition fibromyalgia. Now, I'm not here to say to anybody that you don't have fibromyalgia. You know, I am not a medical doctor. So at any stage, please go and seek out your own advice and opinions from your healthcare provider. But I see a correlation in so many people within my communities, particularly of things like fibromyalgia and autoimmune disorders, where we are producing cortisol beyond that which we need to produce as well. And what happens is, and this is say for fibromyalgia, there's not actually a definitive test for fibromyalgia. It's a series of questions that your healthcare provider will ask you, and then they will diagnose you with having fibromyalgia. Now, I have worked with many people who've had a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, and when we have processed the trauma, and when I say process the trauma, I mean timestamp things into the past, really help my clients, my communities, those that are part of my Narcissistic Trauma Recovery Program, which you can see again, the link below, where you can have a little nose and a read about it to see if you're ready to invest your time, energy, and money in really being proactive in your own healing. And what happens is that fibromyalgia diagnosis, you know, the people I've worked with, once we start to process that trauma and timestamp these events into the past, to help people recognize they're now in the present moment. They are safe now. That dials down then the cortisol production, because the brain and the body are like, I'm safe now. I no longer need to be in a fight, flight, freeze response in anticipation of danger. So let me give you an example for that. Whenever I used to see my ex-husband, who was a covert narcissist, say on, child contact weekends or things like this, beforehand, my body would be going into a full-blown trauma response. Literally, it was wanting to fight, it was wanting to run away, it was in fight and also in freeze, and it was fluctuating really between all three of those trauma responses. My body was flooding with cortisol in anticipation of this danger of when I was going to see him. Now, my life wasn't in any actual danger, but what it was it's taking me back. The narcissist was triggering and scratching the scab of my wounds of not feeling good enough, because trauma isn't necessarily the person or the event. It's our inability to cope and what we say to ourselves about the person in the event. So my ex-husband wasn't the trauma. My trauma was I'm not good enough, because that was my interpretation of why the narcissist behaved like that. So to protect me from that pain of feeling not good enough, my body would go into a fight, flight, or freeze. I'd produce more cortisol in my body. And what would happen then is I'd carry on producing that even long after the narcissist had left the building, but I was still producing that cortisol. That would then potentially, over a long period of time, lead to disease and illness and things like chronic pain, autoimmune disorders. You know, my mom suffered really badly when she was alive, God rest her soul, with rheumatoid arthritis. And because I do things like internal family systems in the work that I do, which is an evidence-based parts therapy, I treat things like fibromyalgia, chronic pain, rheumatoid arthritis as a protector part of our system. And you might think, Caroline, how can they be a protector part? It's painful. But remember, however your system is, very often it's because it thinks if they weren't there, you'd be in more pain. And when I started looking into training in internal family systems, they had got some evidence-based research that they had done around rheumatoid arthritis. So if you look at, say, rheumatoid arthritis as a protector part, and when I say protector part, I mean protector parts have the most loving intention for you to try and distract you away from pain. However, they can also be destructive because, of course, you don't want to necessarily be in pain. And they've got a research article that was really looking at rheumatoid arthritis almost as somebody's system. What's more painful, feeling not good enough as an 11-year-old little girl, or the pain of rheumatoid arthritis? And when I read all of this research and really looked into it, it was like a light bulb moment coming off, particularly when I thought of my mother. You know, my mum had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis at a very, very early age, in her early 30s, which is young, other than if it was juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. So she was a young woman still when she got diagnosed. And she went through a lot of childhood trauma when her dad left, and a whole host of stories behind all of this. But one of the things he said to her when he left was, look after them. So, and that was her mum and her sister. And she literally took that on board as a reflection of her if they then weren't happy, because her dad had said she needs to look after them. So she then had these I'm not good enough wounds. She was abandoned by her father and rejected by him. She was desperately trying to make her mother happy, her sister happy. In the midst of all of these things, she had to leave school at 16 because they needed money as a family, desperately trying to please everybody else. No coincidence she ended up in a relationship with someone like my dad. As much as I love my dad, he can still be quite unemotional about things, probably a lot of where my issues came from as well. So being in that relationship with my dad, also having the childhood that she did, her system was, hey, producing more cortisol, leading to inflammation. Rheumatoid arthritis for my mum was a really great focus, because actually the focusing of the pain of rheumatoid arthritis actually for her was still less painful than focusing actually on the pain of feeling rejected, abandoned by her father. And that then had a knock-on effect. Now you may be watching this and maybe you're relating to this as well. And this is where though it's the power of parts work, the power of understanding the biology of our systems, and when we're producing that cortisol, what that can lead to. And there's so much in the trauma world now as well that, you know, 80% at least of disease and illness, likely to be more, is caused by excess cortisol in our body when it doesn't need to be there. And what can happen is that can then lead to things like burnout, you know, our adrenal glands, which pump out all of this cortisol, which sits on the top of our kidneys, literally tire out. They're pumping out cortisol long after which they need it for. And that can happen very much from things like the trauma of narcissistic abuse, many other different things too. But I'm obviously relating all of this to narcissistic abuse because I could really relate to that. You know, I was starting to feel pain in my joints because my body was filled with inflammation because I was producing excess cortisol long after I needed to produce it. The moment I started to work somatically and from an embodied approach within my body and process all of this trauma, I no longer needed to be producing that cortisol to go into a fight, flight or freeze response in my body. And guess what happened? My inflammation started to subside. And again, I've met with many people within my program, within my community, that when we start to do all of these things, their inflammation and their pain starts to subside. Because if you're looking at it from a protector part perspective, if you're working on those inner child wounds, the protector part and the pain element of that thinks, okay, I no longer need to distract you away from something that you've worked on in your healing then as well. So that part no longer needs to take on that role. And that's not to say, you know, autoimmune disorders aren't real. It's not to say fibromyalgia isn't real. They absolutely are. And they can cause a lot of damage within our bodies as well. Sometimes irreversible damage. But I always look at things, how much of all of these things are caused by emotional trauma leading to that pain? And how much of the pain then is simply from something that is physiological and it would have been there anyway. You know, if you're suffering with say 9 out of 10 on the pain scale with maybe chronic pain or autoimmune disorder, you know, if we process that trauma, maybe we could get that down to a 4 out of 10 on the pain scale. Yes, it's still 4 out of 10, but it's better than 9 out of 10, right? It really, really is. So if you can resonate with any of this, I would love to know in the comments below. Tell me, have you been diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder? Are you suffering with chronic pain? Let me know in the comments below so that I can see. Let's see how many actually have been diagnosed, actually have this, so that you can see you are not the only one in all of this. Because my wish for you is for you to know you are seen, you are heard, that you are not on your own in any of this. I'm right there in the trenches with you because I want to help and support you move from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth, because it really is possible. So let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you're really interested in learning more about this, then go and watch one of my other videos looking at the trauma responses of narcissistic abuse. Take care, and I'll see you on the next episode.